We made it to Friday again. Just barely.
Yay!
Just barely.
But a hell of
Welcome
a
to Rabble
week.
Rants. Yeah, yeah. This always happens at the end of the week, doesn't it, though? Why did we pick
It
Fridays?
it's true, but this week feels like it was a little bit busier, and I think mostly because we had the Ontario election. That really took a lot of time for everybody. I know it did for me. I'm sure it did for you too.
It took a lot of mental time. I'll be honest, I did not work on the campaign, but it had felt a certain responsibility to it, but maybe not what most people think it is. Let's see if we can get this week's special guest into the studio. Kim is going to join us to unpack the Ontario election. Kim Bradshaw, you'll remember her from previous Rabble Rants, and an Ontario activist, likely went door to door on this or has been talking to people closely about what the fuck happened. So that's really what we're going to answer. We'll look at a couple key writings that kind of tell maybe a bigger story, but that's not going to be all that we're going to talk about today. There are other things on the agenda. There's a Jeremy Appel piece we're going to have to share with folks on the University of Calgary. The US is just upending geopolitics as we know it, so we'll unpack that a little bit, as well as some other headlines that are pretty juicy. And as usual, we will end the segment with some disruptive updates from across Turtle Island, what people are doing, successes they've had, disrupting the status quo and fighting the good fight, as well as a very timely activist tip of the week. So stay tuned for that. But let's bring Kim in. She can introduce herself. Hopefully, unmute yourself for us, Kim, and say hello.
There we go.
There we go.
Having technical difficulties today, guys. Sorry about that.
Not a problem. Happens all the time.
We live in a one big technical difficulty, so don't worry about it.
Don't we? Oh my God. Talking about technical difficulties, how about that election last night?
Yeah, it feels like a bit of a hangover. I did field trip duty yesterday that involved a lot of snowshoeing. And so I was already exhausted and said I needed to go to bed, and then realized, oh no, the fun has just begun. I should be looking at the results. And I asked my partner, should we look at the results or should we not? And he's like, you really should just rest. You got a big day tomorrow, And I was like, yeah, but I can't just not know. And so I made the mistake of clicking on, the CBC Live tracker where they would trickle in. I did. And I was like, for a while, nothing was really news, right? It was like hold, like nobody was flipping any ridings until they did. And then that's kind of where a lot of our discussion will probably be. But How are you all feeling the morning after Doug Ford's majority?
Yeah.
I'm looking for explanations, right, Joe?
Yeah. I mean, I am and I'm not. As you know, one of the things I did do is I was able to stay a little bit awake later, and I discussed with a fair amount of other people, other voices, and a lot of people that actually, were involved in some ways. Some people were from their local ridings and other places. The one view that I got a sense of from a lot of people was also, I think most of us collectively felt that this was going to go in that direction. How much, how severe, we didn't know. And even still, I know for myself and many others, no matter how prepped we felt that this might come, it still felt like a kick.
Yeah.
Like it still sucked. Like it still felt, this is a terrible thing. We see the whole thing is a terrible thing if it goes in this direction. He's a terrible choice, and we've all done the work. We all knew that it was still going to be going in that direction anyways. I still felt like why? But, and obviously there's a whole bunch of factors. I mean, Kim, what was your feeling on it?
We actually were in a riding that had a lot of high hopes. I'm in Milton. And our candidate of choice here, and I'm going to be very blunt. I used to wear green, and I stopped wearing party colors because I think the system is designed to do what it's doing, and it isn't functioning the way we need it to function. So we need a new system, in my opinion. So I kind of gave up on. I joined Fair Vote Canada for a while, for example, and we need electoral reform. but I don't think that's going to move fast enough for us, and we know why. So the riding we were in, I was supporting a Liberal. Her name is Christina Tesser Dirksen. She is our Ward 1 councillor, a phenomenal person, also a phenomenal candidate. She pulled an incredible campaign together in such a short period of time. She came within 1,000 votes. That was the only difference in our ride. Sorry, 200,000, depended on the poll, but the poll I scrutineered, it was just 200 votes. And when you've got an incumbent who is part of the ruling party, coming up with that close a call, we put some pressure on. And I certainly think it showed that the winds of change are happening in Milton. So look out next time. That didn't make me feel any better about the results, especially coming back with Wendy gained 1 seat in the end. I didn't stay up late enough to get the finals, but I couldn't believe that he got another majority. That I just don't understand even how. If you talk about voter turnout, if you talk about just all the issues, how is it possible with so many people that I think Jessa and Joe, we're working hard against the changes that are being made? Like how can this happen? How is it a majority? I actually have to ask, I wonder about voter suppression, and I wonder about some less than above board things going on. I have no evidence of anything, but I would love to do some digging, and I may just do that in the days ahead.
Well, it's definitely worth talking about a lot of the issues that you did. What were you going to say, Joe?
Oh, no, go first. I got something else after that to go with this.
To go with the mention of voter suppression?
Not so much of voter suppression, but I mean, we've got a crazy, it's like the number's up to 80. I ignored it after 76. My bad. To be honest, it's 76 or 80. It's still crappy. I had an old friend who used to say, it's a bit like flooding your basement. Whether it's up to your ankles or up to your knees, it's still a mess, by how much he's won his majority. But it's...
All right, I'll give you guys a bright side then, because you guys, he did actually lose seats.
Okay,
right?
Go through them.
So he pulled this election, and it was explicit saying, I want a super majority, which doesn't exist here, but I want a stronger mandate is some of the language. And he even implied that he hadn't been working as hard as he could have been. And if you gave him a stronger mandate, he would. And he didn't get that. He didn't get that at all. So he wasted a lot of Ontario taxpayers' money calling an early election when it could have been an email. Not a lot changed, but for him, this is not really a victory because, like I said, like all of us, I think, expected him to win. We just didn't want to see too much growth. But okay, we could talk about voter suppression and the stories that came out around it for sure, but voter turnout, whether that, there's more playing into that low, that's so low. What was it? 38% or 37% voter turnout is really, really bad. If it's those are by-election numbers. Those are very low. And some ridings were, especially northern communities. So when you're talking about accessibility and issues like that, that might've played into it. They were really bad. And we had a feeling it was going to be that way based on the advance poll numbers to a degree.
Yeah. The advanced polling numbers were people were kind of concerned about because it was only about 6.18%. And that's over the span of 3 days. And I remember talking to quite a few people, and because everybody's like, oh my God, it's terrible. We've never had this low. I'm like, all right, let's actually unpack. What was it before? Last time was 9% for the voter turnout. But we had this voter turnout 6.18% over 3 days. The 9% was over 10 days. And before that, it was it was actually a slightly higher it was a 6.18, while our current one is 6%. And the 6.18 was over 5 days. So the shortened time window, I'm not too sure it's really was a terrible indicator in regards to the turnout.
No, so some of the stories that came out about voter suppression, there are many. on top of just like natural systemic ones like the snow and the city of Toronto. So the intersections are still not fully clear. The sidewalks are sure not. And it's really hard for disabled folks to get around the city right now. This surely played into it. I also saw reports from homelessness advocates, at least in the city of Toronto, desperate to get the paperwork needed to allow people without the proper identification and address to vote. And, it seems like maybe some of the agencies that do that kind of aid work didn't know about the process, weren't prepared for it, and a lot of folks without addresses were disenfranchised that way. There's a comment here from a viewer, Maple Mines, welcome, talking about people being told they weren't registered when they knew they were registered, or here actually being told that they had already voted when they hadn't. So I didn't get a voter card, even though I've run in my riding twice. Everyone else in my family got one, but I didn't get one. I know I can vote without one, but you don't have to make it any harder for folks. They're already busy. Voter turnout's already low. And then now they don't know where to go. They got to look that up. Then they know there's extra, paperwork or answering questions to do if you don't have a card. And, that's just asking for more and more people to disengage. I mean, I have a lot of reasons why I disengaged beyond not getting a voter card, but many people did not get theirs. Any other stories you guys got?
I wanted to know about the polls that ended up staying open till as late as 10:30 last night. Did you guys get the background on that?
We got some
No, but that shit
information
happens
about
every
that.
election.
Yeah, it was, I believe, a couple of Toronto ones, and they were mentioning that it's just they had a lot of lineups and they just weren't able to process. So, particularly if a riding has a lot of people in there, they're going to be backed up. Again, people aren't going to be voting during the day; they're going to be voting after work.
Yeah, and it's like
one of the
staffing.
things that really Sorry, Jessica, go.
It could be staffing issues. I've worked an election where there was actually like a bomb threat near the school that had the polling station, which shut the school and actually 2 of the schools in that area down for 3 hours. So they had to tack it on to the end. You get a lot of complaints from Elections Canada and Ontario folks that employees don't show up to work the day of. And so sometimes they don't open when they should because they have to scramble to find enough adequate staff to then finally open the polls. So if they're late in opening, they have to add that time on to the end. There's lots
All the
of
more reason not to call a snap election, just saying, especially in the winter.
Oh, yeah. And clearly Ford knew, though, that maybe, Elections Canada and Ontario, this isn't their first rodeo. They should always be prepared. Isn't that their fucking job? Like, what are they doing right now?
Yep.
Then, if it's not making sure they're ready for an election. But same goes for the NDP and the Liberals. They clearly were not ready for an election, right? They didn't have proper candidates lined up, or they let through some really shitty ones. Liberals had to let a few go for stepping in it. And Ontario NDP was full of paper candidates. Full. People you'd never heard of. They didn't go to the debates either. They didn't hand out any flyers. Speaking from my riding's perspective, we doubled the vote share at one point. You could go through certain neighborhoods in this riding and they would be full of orange signs. And to think that they had lost all that ground, out of just, for the Ontario NDP, it was disdain for the grassroots on a local level, and I think as a more general level, that they weren't prepared. They just didn't have, I think, the resources to beat the PCs. So in the end, they didn't flip. The NDP didn't flip one seat except for Hamilton Centre. Anybody want to start there so I can just rest my... Because I got a lot to say on what happened to Sarah Jama there. So
let's talk about that. I want to hear about that. Go ahead.
Well, in Hamilton Centre, the NDP won, but that meant independent Sarah Jama lost her seat. And to be fair, she lost it real bad. The last time I checked, only half of the polls had reported. I should probably pull it up, or maybe Joe can
I could pull it up.
His magic on something here. But she had a third of the NDP's votes. So I think with half counted, it was like 9,000 votes for Robin Lennox, who is now the new MPP there. And Sarah had only accumulated 3,000 votes at that point. So this is like, there's so much to unpack here that I'll probably still be processing this for a while, because this took me by surprise, but I am not there. I didn't see the ground game, but I do know the Ontario NDP did throw a lot of resources at trying to win this riding. This was an important victory to them for some reason.
Right.
Not like a numbers game. They didn't play that very well. And but they really wanted this riding from Sarah. And to think they spent resources doing that instead of trying to flip even one riding, because they didn't flip any other riding. They didn't take one seat away from the PCs. The Liberals did that. Only the Liberals did that. I hate the fucking Liberals. So this isn't to be like, oh, they were just such great people. Like Bonnie Crombie couldn't even win her seat. But they took it. They're ideologically closer, I suppose. But the PCs took some from the NDP. Right? They took Hamilton Mountain.
Oh, did they? Okay,
yes.
I missed that one.
So Hamilton voters, I don't know what the hell is going on with you people.
Well, this is where the fiddling comes in, right? Given his record, the Ford record with unions, how is it all these unions were backing him? And LiUNA, what do they do? Build highways, right? And build stuff. And I gotta wonder, Hamilton Mountain, do they have a lot of people that work in construction or highways? I don't know. I gotta wonder how it got so heavy. I'm just really struggling. I'm probably in an echo chamber. That's probably the problem. I don't know very many people that like what Ford is doing. And so when I see something come out like these numbers, I'm just blown away. I'm like, really? Like, where are these people? Where do they come from?
Those trade unions that you're talking about, like one of them is my husband's trade union. They're awful. Like, you can't really call them workers' unions. The bosses are sitting there siding with class enemies. I mean, if you polled that demographic, they're probably conservative voters by large part, from what I've heard of the talk on work sites. A lot of the work sites, at least from my just personal anecdotal experience, but I imagine that's what it's like. But, that's a numbers game, and that is typical of any kind of, I support unions, but sometimes
Absolutely.
They get so narrowly focused on the material conditions, like, of their workers alone, or their partners in industry. So developers, right? If developers are doing well, our workers have jobs.
Yeah.
If there's more buildings going up, stupid fucking tunnels being built, like, that is all jobs for our workers. And their prime goal is to, do their workers best. But they're not taking into account the other things that play into those material conditions, right? Like the state of their healthcare, the kids' education, all the other things that we value as a society go by the wayside. But on paper, they can still go to their members and say, we supported the guy who promised to build the most. Right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
And when people are looking after themselves, it's hard to justify, well, like, what are you going to say as a union leader at this point in this political climate? No, we're going to side with the folks that are doubling ODSP and promising to, curb developers and add fees to it. And so, then people start thinking about themselves and going,
which is fair. I mean, you got to look after yourself, right? But it's interesting because when you're always in a better situation when everyone around you is in a better situation. If you're the only one in a good situation, it's probably pretty dangerous for you. So you're as safe as your neighbors, and the healthier we have a community, the healthier all of us will be. It's not just an individual game. And I think that's where the messaging is the divide and conquer again, right? Worry about yourself, worry about your industry, worry about your family and your kids. And, everything else is somebody else's problem. And unfortunately, that is not how societies evolve or advance or progress. So it'll be really interesting to see what gets arrested around here. I'm also curious what you guys think about the Trump play, that the card that Ford was waving around all the time about how he's going to stand up to Trump. Do you think that had any impact?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest things that he had with him when he called the snap election was his, his messaging and his the little stunt he did in regards to we're going to be tough on Trump and he's not going to show us and we're going to take out the liquor for 5 minutes out of the LCBO and we're going to pretend to cancel the Starlight contract and we're going to be as tough as possible for 5 minutes and then as soon as we think it's going to be okay, everything gets back on there.
Well, we all know he deals in backroom deals. So,
yeah.
I found it really amusing that he thought, and of course, his past statements about Trump and his favor for Trump, for him to come out against it now was just so blatantly a play as opposed to any form of sincerity or even bravado. I mean, it was just hilarious.
And people ate it up. Like that's the terrible thing. They just literally ate it up on
both sides, right?
Fist.
They all saw enough, right? So if with that secret hot mic where he's like, "Oh no, I like Trump," some people are like, "Yeah, I knew you did. You could play tough when you need to, but you're still on my team." It was like affirmation. It didn't really faze them at all. Mm-hmm. And then when they promised to cut the Starlink deal, that did make him look tough. Shit, we were tweeting about it. I mean, the fucker backpedaled on it the second the tariffs were delayed. To be fair, right? It was. It had nothing to do with the schmatzy salute, right? It was all about money. So once the tariffs were delayed, then he was like, okay, well, the deal's back on. But that didn't get as much press as anything else, right? Yeah. And so people heard what they needed to hear. And I saw some people trying to analyze the platforms. That's great. That's great. But do you think your average Ontario voter even heard the platform? Because if you heard the debate, it's all just rhetoric and their favorite recipes. And there was not a lot of substance to anything. And I don't think most people knew the differences between the platforms. I'll tell you, some people, anybody on ODSP, they knew the difference in those platforms.
Yes.
And I might sound like a broken record, but people don't talk about this issue enough. And what this majority does mean to those folks, because I often say it doesn't really matter win or lose. We organize, we fight, we still hold people accountable. But there were 3 parties on there promising to double ODSP eventually, and we could pick apart each the way that they would delay it and what those promises would actually turn into. But to lose that was really devastating for folks who are in legislated poverty right now. So,
absolutely.
I won't let this up. I hope folks pick this up as an issue because, your party's just reaffirmed that those folks are living on half of what they'd be willing to pay them. So when do we prioritize this from Ford and make that one of our demands, collectively is something I'd like to see. But
so the only other thing I wanted to kind of point out today was the Greens held their ground. And I don't know if anybody looked at Muskoka Perry Sound, but Matt Richter came this close to replacing Graydon Smith.
Nice.
What is it? Graydon got 21,731 and Matt got 19,360. So
check here.
Big race there. And again, let's just point out that our electoral system delivered the wrong proportion of chairs to the votes, right? We all know that we need electoral reform, that when you end up getting X number of votes, you're going to get potentially twice as many seats. Just pulling up that doc that I had saved, if I can
There is actually, I think you're jumping into a particular graph actually I want to bring up with you because you're talking about fair voting. And hopefully this might be what you're thinking of.
Okay.
This one is something I wanted to discuss because this actually tells an interesting story. Yes. So the NDP here has 25 seats and the Liberals got 12. Now, this is a bit of an earlier shot because obviously this is when they were still leading, but the final number was about the same. Check the vote count compared to the seats.
Exactly my point.
Exactly.
So Kim, you seem dismayed at electoral reform would be so far away, but at least you've got an argument with your liberals now, right? To be like, hey, you guys got fucked by first past the post. Like, I mean, royally. Like, not poor Bonnie. Like, I'm so sorry, but FYI, she didn't win her seat. I know I mentioned it, but I just wanted to say it again. But they're having to stand up there and make a speech after that. I do kind of feel for that. And she is awful in selling this. I should have queued it up because it's cringeworthy. Folks should look at it. She's trying to act like it's a victory. And at one point she does have those numbers. She says 30. I think it's 29, but we all do that. And 29.7. But that is a huge vote share. You got a third of the vote share, but you have almost nothing to show for it. They're having to celebrate Jagmeet style. Really, it's a loss, but we still have official party status, and that's her rallying cry for these people who've worked.
You mean they regained official party status?
Yes, they regained official party status. She's like, that, that's worth celebrating. And
well, it is.
You do have to find victories, but yeah, I think the NDP got really lucky with these numbers. This could have told a completely different story, but on top of what they did in Hamilton, they lost a couple. I should have had more notes on which ridings because some of them didn't surprise me so much, but Toronto St. Paul's did. Dr. Jill Andrew losing her seat surprised me because she was a favorite amongst Ontario NDP members. I imagine she would have had, and she did get a lot of people showing up for her canvassing. But yeah, I mean,
I have a favorite flip.
Yes, please.
Ottawa. So this is Ottawa West Nepean. And this was the riding of Lisa MacLeod. And it's been flipped away from her and over to Tyler Watt, a new Liberal candidate.
Wow.
Now, Lisa MacLeod has said and done some pretty horrible statements, and we're not going to miss her in so many ways. But yeah, it was flipped over, and she was a riding I was watching quite a bit because she won her riding by like 2 to 3%. It's like 37% of her votes is what she got in the last election.
I forgot Lisa lost. I just found joy again. Thank you.
I know.
It's
so great to see that one happen.
Like beaming, the comments are even,
Oh, the comments are, again, if you know Lisa MacLeod and you've seen the stuff she's done, and we're talking from everything from general comments in regards to conservative to even Zionist statements.
Oh,
we're not going to miss her. Oh,
no, she's the you are all terrorists, deport them all mentality. And that's before or that's after she was an awful minister. Oh God.
So
what clip you got for us, Joe?
Yeah, so we got one little win in there, and I'm kind of enjoying that one little one.
Yeah, no, we'll take wins wherever we can get them, and I don't know if anything humbles that man. No. But, he didn't get what he asked for. Ford did not get what he asked for at all. So, draw some joy in that. But I'm wondering, Kim, did you go door knocking for Liberals? And if so, did you?
Yeah, I absolutely went door knocking. But what was the question?
What are most people asking about? We always try to figure out, what is the issue on people's mind? Like, if you had to say, the one key item people kept coming back at you with, what was it?
Honestly, I'm going to be really brutally honest. I had very few conversations at the door. Most people were loath to even answer the door. And when they did, they took the lit. A few people were excited about the Liberal candidate, but we got a lot of negativity as well. I was a little surprised. And I wondered if that was a little bit of the reflection of what's happening federally. Although I know it's shifted hugely with the leadership campaign. So I'm not sure where that was at, but yeah, it was interesting. When I hear anecdotally, so I can't speak for myself, but anecdotally, what I heard from other canvassers was that it really did come back down to healthcare was number one, and education. And of course, affordability, right? Always affordability. It's we can't afford anything. So those were the top three. And those are the ones that Christina ran on. And she did a I'm sorry, I'm going to say it again. She just did an amazing job. That she should have had this riding. It's very disheartening.
The
Anyway.
the most disheartening is the way we turn on each other after as voters or non-voters, blaming voters, and like we seemingly forget how much sway the powerful have, and the media consumption that we have, and what ends up being a prioritized issue on the campaign trail. And we talked about it on previous episodes. I'm just going to casually mention it now. Like, conservatives didn't show up anywhere to answer any questions.
No.
They didn't have to face that anger. I know for sure that they didn't even go door knocking in my area, so they just, and they even sent a memo out to folks who worked on the campaigns thanking the candidates for, minimizing the amount of interviews that they took. That way there was nothing that blew up during these 30 days, right?
And
there was really no crisis created.
I'm amazed there's not more backlash about that, frankly. I mean, we don't really live in a democracy, but people like to believe we do. And if we do live in a democracy, the least we should be able to do is question our candidates. And for you not to show up to a conversation or a debate, to me is cowardly. It just shows that you've got everything to lose if you open your mouth, and therefore you won't. And I'm sorry, that doesn't speak to me about democracy or my concerns or standing up for your riding in any way, shape, or form.
But that brings me to another question, because you're absolutely right. These they didn't get involved in many of the debates. They didn't go door knocking. And very much so, as you say, and it's the same thing as I've noticed too, which it's a system that's working. I mean, we've seen it all the way from the top with Pierre Poilievre, who's avoiding reporters, only answering questions that he's cleared, or his communications group has cleared. They're completely controlling the messaging, and they're not allowing for an actual open debate or discussion or being challenged on anything. And nobody's challenging, and everybody's finding it to be absolutely acceptable. Like, how are we here, and how did this become the norm?
I don't know.
Question.
Well, I do have a hypothesis. I do think a lot of this has to do with the corporate backing of politics, right? Corporations manage their image, they manage their messaging, and nobody gets to come and talk to a board of directors about why their product is doing A, B, or C. So they're running it like a corporation, and it's working. And it's terrifying because we don't have democracy. One of my favorite podcasters, Amanda Scott, who runs Accidental Gods, she loves to say we have the best democracy money can buy. And we do, because that's what happens. Unless you've got money, you cannot run. And that is not what a democracy is supposed to be about. So we are nowhere near a democracy in Canada. We think we are, but I would beg to differ, and I would love to have some debates with people about what really constitutes a democracy and how to get involved. But when you've got people struggling to put food on the table and pay their rent and everything else they've got to worry about, they don't have time to engage in politics. They're just trying to make ends meet. What better way to keep us suppressed? People think that the feudal system died with the Industrial Revolution. I got news for you guys. We are in a feudalism. We are all plebes, and the corporations are the masters. So if you think you're not in a feudal society, I'd look at it in a different lens.
Well, yeah, where did they think all the lords went, right? It's like that song, the Nazis all came out of the woodwork, after the war even. So it's like we just move them around. We shift the structure a little bit. But speaking to like what kind of democracy money can buy, let's listen to Colin DeMillo reporting on how Ford was spending our money during the election. The
no
audio's great. So typical.
It's because it's muted. The video itself is muted. Right there.
That's right.
Yep.
Thank you.
as part of an influence campaign to try to avoid Trump's tariffs. That was then. This was now. In 2 months, so much has changed. Doug Ford decided in early February to call an early election, but nevertheless, that didn't stop him. The one thing that was different, though, was the messaging. What Doug Ford has been saying on this campaign trail was tempered. Instead of the tough talk, we heard a lot of American working together. That's what we heard today.
That wasn't actually speaking to what I needed him to, but it speaks to the messaging that we talked about selling Ontarians on his image. But he used that kind of messaging and imaging in ads, 15 different campaigns that the the ombudsman, the Auditor General deemed the advertising was designed to promote the governing party rather than the province, right? So we saw him put a lot of advertising into American channels, sponsoring.
And our money paid for that.
Yeah, so that was taxpayer money. It didn't come out of Ford's campaign,
No.
even though it was clearly trying to promote the current government and their work, rather than like, come stay in Ontario, beautiful Ontario, open for business. It was more of, here's what we've done, and so much so to the point that they had to stop those ads. So, how many people saw those ads that were paid for. Another trick is those stupid mailings that they put out all the time, especially the Conservatives are the worst at this. And it's really just, there's no meat to their newsletters. It's really just campaign material, but it's actually paid for by the taxpayers.
Absolutely.
So,
I was going to say, we have an incumbent federally. We had an incumbent, our provincial incumbent let's try again. There was a PC incumbent a few years ago who did nothing but run visual ads 365 days a year. He has them running all the time. And I'm like, is that legal? All it does is say who he is, his party, and the fact that he is your member of provincial parliament. So yeah, that's great. It's good to know who your member of provincial parliament is, but it's not an election period. And it's still political signage, but he's allowed to run those ads 365 days a year. Sorry? I don't understand what's happening.
It's because these offices are supposed to be a service, but the progressive Conservatives are notorious for, having really shitty office hours and being not very responsive to
Do they
people.
go to the office?
They don't. Their staff
so.
do. And their staff are supposed to help you navigate provincial bureaucracy. So if you are having trouble with any of the ministries, you're supposed to be able to go there. If you don't know how to sign up for ODSP or you're having issues, there's supposed to be a level of support through these offices. That's really what they were designed for,
I have
in
a
large
good
part.
friend that
Not
lives
just to vote on shit, but to help the community access the provincial government and its services. But they don't do a very good job of that. But because that's what they're supposed to provide, then they can then tell everybody, here's where your MP is, here's where to find them. Come on in,
Yeah, interestingly,
and
there were no
that's a
addresses
service
on
they're
these
doing
ads.
for you. Yeah, it's not a good morning probably for a lot of people who had just finished this election. I feel for people who were working it and trying to pull the vote yesterday, knowing what the numbers were, that those would have probably been really ugly lists they were finished with. When you have your GOTV list, you're like, you got to cross everybody off, right? Did you talk to them? Did you go to their door? Did you? And I imagine there was a lot of, leave me alone. I'm not in this. Every party probably saw their numbers dwindle in terms of participation by the looks of it. So, yeah, I feel for folks right now thinking really hopelessly, but it's just think of it as we're in the same fight we were in 40 days ago. The exact same place to a degree, and have the same kind of job ahead of us. This was
I was going to say, my job
ended up being a distraction.
I'm still on it.
Yeah, this just wasted people's time, I think, and energy with the especially with the outcome not being all that different. But yeah, let's move on to another topic if you don't mind. Or does anybody have any kind of thing you felt you left unsaid there?
I'm good.
No,
We're good.
We're good.
What more can you say?
No, let's
We're
move
as
to
good
Trump.
as we can be.
Yeah, we could. You could always chime in later if you think about it, but geopolitics is just like all over the place. I studied political science in university, and I'm thinking back to some of the textbooks on international relations, international law, the makeup of the UN, and like the political makeup, not just the structure. That hasn't changed, but watching the US vote with Russia and other, so-called pariah states, I think has people not knowing which way is up or down. It has me thinking about reading 1984. For folks who haven't read George Orwell's novel, one of the features of governance is the ability or the historical pattern of switching enemies for friends and pretending like this was always the case and that we should have forgotten all of the anti-Russian propaganda that they have spewed for so long, and almost like midstream switch and in 1984 people simply react by going along with it, right? There's people changing dictionary entries to make it like this was always the case, that kind of idea. And obviously you're punished for not going along with it, for not referring to it as the Gulf of America, and the result is everyone just like, okay fine. And I'm not, I'll say I think Putin is a piece of shit, but I'm not an anti-Russian propagandist by any means.
No.
By any means. Red baiting has done so much harm to our political movements, and the history of revolution in Russia is a tool for us to learn that history, and there's stuff to unpack there that I'm not going to bother today. But watching the U.S. flip and turn on Ukraine tells people to really, I think, unpack those global political situations before it gets to this point. Because I find, we often take what our government tells us about international relations as gospel and how our relations should be made up. And a lot of it has to do with like this whole Western imperialism that we've talked a lot about on the show. But yeah, Europe just doesn't know what to do either. Folks have probably seen J.D. Vance standing up in front of European leaders and getting almost no blowback. I mean, there's some quips in speeches that came before and after him, but generally most people just sat there stoic, didn't boo. Many of them abstained from this. It was largely symbolical vote in the UN to deal with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and it should have been like a no-brainer. Either you were in or out. At least all the other resolutions they had done had not had this much contention around them. It was on the anniversary of the launch of that invasion, and so. But most states just abstained. It's like they didn't know what to do. They don't want to confront him, and they don't want to be seen as going along with him, I suppose. But it's getting kind of ugly over there. Right now, I mean, it's breaking news probably somewhere. I don't have the details, but Zelensky is meeting with Trump today to talk about and presumably sign this minerals deal, which would almost, what was the term you used, Joe? It would make Ukraine like a
vassal state.
That was what you
is the
said,
one
yeah.
I was looking at. In which case they just either a vassal state or, and pretty much an arm's throw away from possibly becoming just another territory of the states. And we know how they treat territories.
Yeah. And another problematic angle, well, like problematic for a lot of countries, is his framing of all of that aid, that military aid, and Lord knows how much money they've sent, because we've sent like $9 billion or something ridiculous or more now, that he wants that back. He wants to recoup that money in the form of mineral rights. Yeah. And they also want to talk security promises, which, haven't been worked out yet. So we don't even know all the details of the deal, but it seems like a huge capitulation. Like Ukraine's given the choice. We're either going to give you to Russia because we don't want anything to do with this anymore. You know, I want to move on geopolitically to another enemy or whatever Trump's up to. Or you can give the minerals to us, right? And Russia won't take them from us, because then that's a different story altogether. So they're trying to seek protection through sounds like almost a sort of guardianship to the U.S.
Sounds like a mob story.
It does. But like when you analyze politics, you usually have like U.S. on one side and Russia on the other, and everybody lines up accordingly. This is just really throwing analysts into a spin, trying to figure this out. But to work it back to the Canadian, like, how does this, impact us? Why the fuck should we care? If, let's say you don't care what happens between
Besides
Russia.
the fact that we're right between Russia and the U.S.?
No, but because this is a template for him.
Yeah.
Right? He's already talked about us in the same way, no?
Yeah,
right? He talks about
I was going to say Ukraine would have to be the 52nd state, apparently, because we're the 51st.
Yeah, you wait your turn, Ukraine, because we want to be annexed first. Like that's, and there's even memorandums going back and forth on adjusting the border between Canada and the U.S.
What?
Yes, it'll be guised on security, right? So that we can control these more troublesome areas of infiltration, right? Where the border is weaker, to redraw it so the U.S. has better grounds to do whatever they need to do.
Let me guess. Would it redraw the border to kind of include all the oil wells in Alberta? Or
Who
parts
knows?
of northern Ontario, perhaps?
We have a lot of places where the border goes through First Nations land. Mm-hmm. And that makes it, a spot that authorities feel like they need to infringe on for many reasons. The comments here coming from YouTube, or actually from Twitch, is the Great Lakes. Water is a precious resource, and that's, predominantly where our border goes. So, what this turns into is not, but it's like the thresholds that we thought were really politically possible. They would never do that. That's not possible. Like, we don't even know what that is anymore, right? So these discussions on mineral rights, because we gave you so much aid, he's used that language with us, right? We've helped you so much at the border. We're basically subsidizing Canadian businesses and da-da-da-da-da. And it's just like, well, is that going to be part of his argument to recoup it, or telling the American people, look, there's minerals we need? And Americans are like, yep, that's true. They've seemed thirsty for this imperialism. He wasn't shy about it. They voted for it. Like 6 million of them were like, yep, that's my guy. So, there's fucking appetite for it. They always have been, right? They're Americans. They're imperialists. It's like us in colonialism. We love colonial violence. Like, our government will do anything to protect it. So they do what they do. But it's just something to have folks on the radar, like, not to, it's just, trying to figure out geopolitics. It would be good to get an analyst in, to think how they've had to kind of rewire their perspective a little bit on, and the UN just seems wholly inadequate for everything at this point. It just seems, the idea of international law or relations or even trade agreements having any validity anymore. It's just, it's a whole new world.
Well, I also thought it was interesting that Trump met with Starmer, right? He hasn't talked to European leaders so much as he had Starmer over. Again, after Brexit, now we have Starmer in charge of a nation, and there's no group going after it. Trump very much likes to deal one-on-one, which is what he's done so far, right? He dealt with Putin all by himself without talking to anybody. Now he's going to get Starmer to come along, which we heard he did. We've now got him finally talking to Zelensky, and I was just checking the BBC. Apparently Donald Trump told him, make a deal or we're out, during an angry exchange at the White House. So I'm going to look forward to seeing some of that video after this call. It's a divide and conquer game. That's how he plays it. And that's what I agree with you 100%, Jessa. He's setting up Ukraine in a certain way, and we can expect very much the same here.
Joe, do you want to just kind of introduce the Charlie Angus debacle?
I don't know, but I don't know if I want to call it debacle as
Okay.
much as because it is many things. It is so. Give me a moment here. There's. Oh wait, I do have the video here, I believe.
I think.
So a little while ago, yesterday, Charlie Angus was out in front of the Russian embassy protesting against the invasion of the Ukraine, and he was there to with the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians tried to stop the annexation of Ukraine. When the remnants of the convoy decided to appear there to go question him. Now, if you're familiar with the remnants, the ones I referred to, they're in Ottawa. They're known as the Wellington Street Regulars. They are an interesting bunch, to say the least. I already have the video ready to go here.
Oh, sorry.
But yeah, except I'm just a little slow on the whole thing. So he went in there, and it's just been, you know what? I'm going to let him say it first, so he can say it better.
Yeah, that's for sure, dude.
I was jumped, robbed, and beaten. Ooh, you're a Putin troll. I was jumped, robbed, and beaten. Fuck off, Putin troll. Fuck off, Putin troll. Fuck off, Putin troll. Yeah, you stand outside the Russian embassy and I came here specifically to see you. Fuck off. I came here for you. You and your party, actually, Peter Julian called me.
Now, one of the things he was going to say is that that he says in there is that he's offended that people in the party, in the Liberal Party, have called him an extremist. But this is the individual we're talking about here is an individual by the name of Chris Dacey, who also goes by the moniker Dacey Media, and he is a right-wing pundit or commentator, and the reasons why people call him an extremist is, and I'm going to show you as follows. Recently, he was running around in front of Parliament Hill wearing a Canada First hat and carrying the red ensign. Now, for those who aren't aware, maybe I shouldn't go into this mode here. The red ensign has been lifted by far-right groups now as the Canadian version of the Confederate flag, trying to do a callback to the better days, so to speak. None of this language is ever good. So between that, as well as also using the statement Canada First, we saw Pierre Poilievre doing this. It is a call out to anti-immigration, which comes from a source of xenophobia. The first statement, the first time Canada First came out, is actually, of all people, the Proud Boys. So, that kind of gives you a source in regards to it. And if his loose association using the red ensign and the Canada First wasn't quite enough, he's also associated with Diagolon, who is also an extremist group that's recently been started disbanding and moving into far more. The original members are moving into far more aggressive groups in regards to active clubs and other white nationalist groups. So this is where the source of this individual being called a white nationalist or a fascist comes from. So we haven't. So in ways, this is always kind of one of my issues, which is, people are like, well, the convoy's there and they left it cleaner. I'm like, no, the convoy's here. The convoy did not clean up this because this has been on Wellington Street for the past 2 years, and it's been getting worse. It's sliding further into the right-wing media. Further into the right-wing rhetoric in regards to white nationalism, xenophobia, you name it. Thoughts?
Yeah, no, it's like watching Charlie Angus, though, engage with folks like that, I think is firing people up. I think this would happen to an example of politicians when they are free from the confines of electoralism. Like, Charlie's not running again. He's already said that. So he's not operating as being worried about political blowback. So it's nice to see someone kind of confront these folks, but I'm not sure, I don't like kind of giving them much space either. But yeah, you've got a much closer eye on the happenings of the right wing here in Canada than I, Joe, but I'm grateful for it.
It's this particular one was a kind of they've always got some interesting things, and most of the times you're just kind of shaking your head. But this one was kind of a more visible one. Kit, what do you think? Yeah.
I honestly don't have any polite words to talk about that kind of extremism. It comes from a place of fear. People are afraid. And dividing and conquering isn't going to solve our issues. I think the way to try to break these sorts of things down is to engage people in conversation. The people that are, I know this sounds crazy, Jessa. She's laughing.
No, I just because like that's not what I was envisioning. I had a real Cincinnati, Ohio kind of approach to it all, but
sorry.
I'm sorry.
No.
Well, in Cincinnati, Ohio, Nazis decided they would try to march along an overpass, and the community thought different.
Nope.
And
We're not going to take it.
They didn't take much time to talk to them about it, but they did force them to clamber back into their U-Haul truck quite quickly and disperse. Something the police wouldn't do. So
interesting.
Long term, I know you're right. Because we can't just these people don't disappear. The same with the Nazis didn't actually disappear. We didn't kill them all. They still existed. They're still able to disseminate their ideas clearly. Still. Just not within like the regime that they had. And maybe it's more dangerous this way, right? It's more pervasive. You can't just annex it or sanction it or, isolate it in that way. It's pervasive. But I think, the level of racist stereotypes and settler ideology that we harbor in Canada is something we like to pretend that we don't.
Yeah, that's very true.
But, the exposure of the level of these groups and
the
their popularity,
level.
like they're fringe idea-wise, but they have numbers that we can't ignore, right? That indicate a failure at the conversation level, largely at the political level, of representation and the poor job that the left has done as providing an alternative option to people who are scared of their material circumstances. But for white people too, any kind of threat to our supremacy, which exists on so many levels, right? Like the advantages we get that go beyond, the working class divide. We cannot ignore it. That feels like oppression. They get really, DEI is like this big threat to people. And it's really a time that we all of a sudden start forgetting of the systemic racism that exists, right? That gives us that advantage in so many places that our fellow, racialized working class folks don't get. And seeing a Trump flag is the same as seeing a Confederate flag to me at this point. You're just not as brave. Right? They can use whatever flag. Fuck all these flags. People, stop flying them. Like, you got your Union flags, and I guess, like, they can't really be stolen from you, but in a way, like, they have. Like, look at LiUNA. A LiUNA flag is not the same as flying, like, a steelworker flag. And even then, I've got plenty of examples of steelworkers acting like assholes as a union. And so it's like, this whole flag thing, it's just, it's big red flags all around. But, it's driven by fear, but, like, I don't know. You have conversations with them, but at the same point, are you just giving platforms too? So it's a tough. I think that discussion we had with at the Lunch and Learn. Remind me of her name, Gail Bradshaw. Bradbrook. I'm so close.
Yes, Professor Gail Bradbrook.
Yeah, the idea of building life houses and just mimicking, not in like a playful way, but like in recreating, like in actuality, ways to be after the collapse, right? Because, or during, that
The long
look
emergency.
like where you want to go, right? Because right now, if we were to collapse, as we seemingly are, this is the kind of narrative that is most pervasive, it seems, right now.
Exactly.
Right? Xenophobic, us versus them, everybody for themselves also kind of deal. And if that's the model that we're left with in collapse, that's the model we'll be stuck with on the other side too. So, if you see a model that works, that's like built on mutual aid and isn't like hyper partisan or hyper political, like explicitly
Right.
everything is political, right? But not in that way. People then become radicalized in the right way. Right? Like when
That's the
tenants all
hope.
get together and they talk about their lives, they naturally come to the conclusion that the biggest problem in their life is actually their landlord and the system that, rewards that landlord. And then their most logical next step is to unite against them in different ways. It's not to find another tenant who they could blame it on. That's not naturally what happens when you come together in a life house or a third space that
That's
is, productively creative with purpose. But
you're
there's
looking
a
for
lot
common purpose, right? That's the key when you're talking to people who object to your values, whatever those are, whether they're white supremacy or they're going on the far left end of communism or whatever. If you find the common ground that there is definitely something you can all agree on. For example, I need to eat food to live. Okay, I think we can all agree on that one. That's not really controversial. So let's start there and let's work from there and build on that. So what do we need to do to make sure we have food? Oh, we need to make sure we have farmland. Okay, so if we need farmland, what are we going to do about that? And start working in a direction from commonality instead of coming in it as your values are wrong, my values are right, and we're just never going to be able to get together. It's just not productive. And it really ends up looking exactly what Joe was describing. One guy yelling at another guy and somebody trying to put somebody else down. And it wasn't productive in any way, shape, or form.
It's also about like building something rather than taking something away.
Yes.
Like if you had asked a group of right wing, you don't have enough food to eat because they're in the same economic situation for the large part, right?
Exactly.
Their answer will be like, stop fucking migrants from coming into the country and, driving down wages, if they even understand that's how what it's meant to do. But, their answer for it isn't to create something, at least not yet. Or maybe, you build it, they will come. But then again, you can't just let everybody in.
Just like everybody else, right, Jessa?
Yeah.
There's powers manipulating the people that believe what they're being told. And so what do you think,
same with
Joe?
your American public.
I can see you calculating on that. I'd like to hear your opinion.
No, you're absolutely right in regards to there is very much people pulling into this. I've had many discussions in regards to, and I think I don't think I'm educating anybody here in regards to the social issue wars that I've seen quite a bit. Drag story times, immigration, everything else. Most of the time, these are just the distractions while people are, people in power, people with money are able to move their agenda forward. Because these are, it's like, oh, you want to, the trans issue, that's what's going to be, that's what's affecting you. They're coming after you. They're coming after you in the bathrooms and everything else. These are what I call free kind of issues in regards to these, to the people who are making the influence. Because it costs them nothing whether they open up the bathroom or don't open up the bathroom. They don't care. But it keeps you busy arguing. And for the people on the left who are actually trying to address the class system, it keeps them busy trying to just make sure they're not losing ground over here in regards to the rights to
and defending our community members, right? Like
exactly. So it is, it is the fodder that get these people all wired up and fired up to go against, so that the people who have the power, the ones that they should be fighting, because they're the ones causing the suffering in general, aren't being addressed, because they know they could just get these two groups to go fight back and forth. They even got it so much that they think that they're part of the class, they're part of the class war, and we're not understanding it. And it is unbelievable in regards to no, you guys aren't getting this. it's it's like we understand that that is a class war, and it's because of the immigrants. I'm like, no,
I know.
it's or the trans people. No, it's not that. It's just you've been radicalized and you don't even know it.
Yeah. I think I want to take this time to transition to the story on, when we're trying to fight back against the right wing and politicians calling us into battle, so to speak. Charlie Angus made the list of things to talk about twice this week because, let's see, his... not the only thing he suggested. I take issue with Charlie on a few things. This is going to be one of them. He's not alone. I have a couple of different examples from this week, but he's suggested a way to punish Elon and to push back against his fascist tactics. Maybe it's the Nazi salute that really got him riled up, is to take away his Canadian citizenship. And I know maybe there's going to be some people going, what do you mean he's got Canadian citizenship? Blah, blah, blah. He does. Okay. It's like you can read his wiki if you want to know how. I don't care. He just does. And it doesn't really matter because we don't deploy right-wing tactics. This happens so often, and I feel like I shouldn't have to say this. Same with the Emergency Measures Act. We don't deploy police state tactics on our opponents. You just don't. You're opening up the possibility, increasing the possibility that they'll use this against us. Because they will, and they are, right? They deported an environmental activist who wasn't a Canadian citizen, but it's that tool of deportation based on disagreement, basically, with your political views. So this is Charlie saying, I don't like this guy's political views. Most of the Canadian Parliament won't like my political views. I'll tell you that right now. At all. I call for their dissolution, right? I don't even advocate for keeping the peace, okay? Most of them, if not all of them, probably take issue with my politics and my comrades' politics. And so the solution is not to revoke our fucking citizenship. Because who are you giving this power to? Is it the legislature? And if you have a conservative majority, is it still going to be with the legislature on whose citizenship we can revoke and who we can't? No, we don't do that. That is just introducing, it's just shifting the narrative, right? You've got to hold firm. There's a couple different campaigns going on this week that the NDP have launched, and they're all in the same fucking breath. Heather McPherson, she is, I don't know if she's spearheading it, but she's sharing it and commenting on a petition to prevent Michael Rappaport from entering the country. He's, it's making me sign in for this. Okay, here we go. He's a comedian, I guess, if you want a huge Zionist supporter, prolific on TikTok and probably the other platforms as well. They issue a statement calling on the Canadian government to deny entry to Michael Rappaport. So now we are using border control and border services in order to fight the narratives, these awful narratives, and kind of push back against folks who we don't agree with politically. I mean, this man is defending a genocide. I am for all kinds of repercussions for these people. But to be at this platform and using these as essentially your only ideas, your only original ideas, right? They're asking for an arms embargo, but they had to be begged to do that. So they've gone and thought of this largely themselves to start using like immigration tactics and citizenship status to crack down on their political opponents. And I mean, it's not long before they'll introduce this themselves, but when the left opens the floodgate, it's just one big green light for everybody. It's like, it's telling
when did the NDP start thinking this was a good idea?
They're always for like the most palatable, the most popular idea at the time. And if they think they can just capitalize in it, they just throw their values out the window all the time. With it means testing, there's all kinds of thresholds where they're just like, meh, it's not a line that we're willing to hold. We're guilty of it too sometimes. Like when we talked about the Pat King sentencing, like we all want to see these fuckers rot, right? Like they're parasites on society. I have lots of thoughts about what should happen to them, but they should happen to them not at the state level. I don't believe like employing the police to fight ideological wars. I mean, that's what got Eve Engler put into prison, right?
No,
They decided to use the state and our criminal code to silence a political opponent.
Right.
And we abhor those tactics. So, when the left does it, or the supposed left does it, it's just saying like there is no opposition to this at all. Only your most extreme leftists would disagree with this point. And that's not true, right? That's not true. This isn't the view of most people, that you would go to your neighbor and say, do you think we should take the citizenship away from somebody you don't agree with politically, no matter, Elon's
you have
a different
to put it in
level.
you have to put it in that context as you just did, Jessa, for people to understand it. The context and the way it's being presented is we're protecting you, right? As opposed to how would you word this if it were happening to you or your neighbor, right? So, yeah, it's great the way you're presenting it.
Yeah, like I know this means work for folks. I get it, but it's much more powerful when it happens. Like, we shut it down. Let them come. Let them come and not be able to enter the building. Let them come and have police have to show their face, like that they're going to just make space so this man can spew hate speech, disrupt that show. Don't let that show get off. Embarrass him, right? It's just, and then the community can see that we kept us safe, that we didn't need to rely on the police or border control or our politicians to solve a problem, because that's not ever the solution, right? We can't keep looking up anyway. And it is sure as hell, if they're sending us options like this, we don't have to be looking to them to solve the problem. Let Rappaport come. Let Trump come to the G7 into the Alberta wilderness. Let him come. Let it be a massive demonstration against him. Let it show Canada for what it is, for hosting this man, no matter what his threats are to us, like it's all a farce anyway. But yeah, we quickly get really wrapped up in wanting the worst for our enemies, but we have to be careful that we don't adopt the exact same narratives that we're already fighting, because it wasn't before long that conservative pundits were calling for folks who had been to the funeral in Lebanon of Hassan Nasrallah. No, I didn't get that name right. And asking for them not to be allowed to be returned. And so, because they were... Yeah, go ahead.
As of right now, we've got a lot of people on the right wing, including people like Chris Stacey that we just showed, who are asking for people participating in Palestinian rallies to have their citizenship revoked.
Oh, yeah. And Trump already passed, made way for folks who openly support Hezbollah and Hamas to be deported as well. So, like, it's they're dangerous precedents to set. We don't need to do that. And just on a side note, if folks missed that state funeral that happened in Lebanon, that was I mean, I didn't see the numbers, but just looking at the crowd and the size of the stadium and then outside, it's like the entire nation of Lebanon, it was in Beirut, stood still. And the women, children, the whole spiel. Israeli fighter jets flew low twice right over the funeral, trying to cause distress and mayhem. And, Dimitri Lascaris was there, so that was the footage that I saw. But the leader of the Samiduan network in Canada, which has been deemed a supporter of terrorism or whatever, I don't know the exact phrase that the government uses, their president or their leader was over at the funeral as well. And yeah, conservatives were calling on them to be denied entry when they came back. So it was like a day and a half, and I was tweeting, I told you that our comrades would be facing this shit if you were pumping it. So, yeah, just please don't sign that petition. There are other ways. Maple Minds here in the comments saying that we book my room in Kitimat. If Trump is going to be there, I'm going to be there. And I hear that, that's how we show up. Like, don't lean on those folks up there. They're not going to help us.
Luckily, the Elon Musk petition isn't going to go very far. It's more of sort of a fun little point, but as has been researched, there's an article on CBC talking about the citizenship and the fact that no, the legislator cannot remove the citizenship of anybody. It's never been done. It's not there. There's no law to do that, so it's never going to occur. If he gives up his citizenship, that's one thing, but we can't remove it. He's a citizen. That's it. That's all. I'm sorry. He's a citizen unless, and I believe citizenship can. Actually, I'm not sure, but I believe there is something in regards to deportation in our Canadian law should there be a crime that he's convicted of. So, short of that, and I even question that one too. And as I'm watching Jessa shake her head, you're right. Like, I'm not crazy about that one too, because if you're a Canadian citizen, that should be it. You have a crime that you did on Canadian soil. And again, weaponizing it that way is just problematic. So, yeah, it's not the greatest thing in regards to that. You're right. And again, I've also, not gonna lie, I've been involved in regards to canceling some shows around the city. Some problematic shows. Danger Cats for one, and the other one, Christine Anderson of AFD. Fun. But yeah, absolutely. I do like exactly as Jessa said. Have the community respond to it. Let people see the communities respond to it, especially to the local community. People are nervous. They get to see people there coming out and supporting them, supporting what what they're concerned about and their fears are, showing that there's other people there to help out and that they're not alone, most importantly.
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. Do you want to share with us the story there of the Misrachi organization?
Yes, I didn't get too much of a chance to fully review it, but let me see if I can pull it up here.
I know Jewish Voices was trying to draw attention to it there. The Misrachi organization is a funeral society. And Jewish Voices claims that they're using that to fund Palestinian death. And this won't be, Indigo was a famous campaign that we talked about where, you think you're giving money to a bookstore, and in reality, their owner has a huge fund and a charity that ends up funding the IDF and recruiting orphans from across the world to fight in the IDF. So Independent Jewish Voices has seemingly uncovered another way that funding from Canadian entities is ending up supporting the genocide.
Yeah, Misrachi Organization of Canada has sent millions of taxpayers subsidized donations, to Israel. Affiliated with extremist religious Zionist movement, it serves as the most overt conduit of Canadians looking to support Israeli war crimes and earn a charitable tax credit in the process. Its donor base includes United Jewish Appeal of Greater Toronto and the Jewish Community Foundation of Montreal, amongst others. Give me a second here.
They sent $10 million to Israel in 2023. Like the top recipient there got $1.7 million for West Bank settler militias that are engaging in the ethnic cleansing that we don't often hear enough about in the West Bank and the occupied territories there. We know more about Gaza, obviously, because of the state it's in now, but this has been an ongoing situation in the West Bank forevermore. Well, not forever, but 1948. And so again, this is another way that folks are using the Canadian Revenue Agency. Like, I'm not sure how I feel about using the tax agency, but it's better than using the police. So there's a lot of charities that advocates are going after to get their charitable status revoked. So there's not much you can do. Well, I mean, once you put labels of terrorism on the Israeli state, perhaps. But until then, there's not much you can do to stop people from raising money for Israel. You can't, it's illegal to raise money for foreign militaries, but we don't seem to care about that. But either way, you can't issue tax receipts if you lose your status with the CRA. So that's sometimes not a big deal to people. They're not looking for the tax break. They are looking to actually fund these things. So how big of a deterrent it has on how much money they can raise, I don't know. But this is not the first campaign to do this, and they've been successful in getting a few charitable statuses revoked from Zionist organizations that are just clearly funding the IDF. But what do you got there, Joe?
Oh no, this is a continuation from there. It's very much like these tax funds are these tax charities are funding the settlers. They're funding war crimes, and it's our tax code is very much, it says that you cannot be sending this money to a foreign country to do this, particularly when this is an ICJ and ICC war crime level of violation.
Yeah.
We should not be finding ways to fund these places. We should not be allowing places to fund these things. I mean, we're throwing money to kill people. That's not right.
Yeah. And I think it also speaks to like the pervasiveness of the Israeli lobby on how many different fronts folks are having to engage. Later in the disruptive updates, one of the examples is pension funds, weapons divestment, the court system, right? The way the Israeli lobbyists are able to influence courts. And we saw this week with Eve Ongler, the police activities. The next story that we're going to go to is about universities. So it's been a while since we've seen an encampment, but and it wasn't very long that we got to see this one. The University of Calgary, Jeremy Appel, through freedom of information requests and excellent journalism. Please subscribe to The Orchard if you're not already, and to support independent media like this. Jeremy's written a story there. If Joe, you could pull it up for me. It's he uncovered the amount of correspondence that went back and forth between the university staff and Zionist lobbyists to basically shut down that encampment before it ever started. And, even though students made their demands before the encampment began, nobody even responded to them. They were solely focused on shutting it down right away, even though the University of Calgary has a long history of encampments or similar type occupation style protests that they have allowed to carry on, and even kind of boast that it is part of the democratic process and it's evidence of a healthy political atmosphere in student campus. But they were having none of it, and we reported on it when it happened. But I will remind people that they didn't just shut this encampment down. They showed up stormtrooper style. They fired pepper bullets or balls and pepper grenades at the students, like immediately. It was just like a brutal show of force to clear it the evening it went up. And they spent a lot of resources setting up a command center before it was ever put up, and scouring the internet for information on whether or not there would be an encampment and where it would be. And, go read the article from Jeremy to get all the details that he was able to uncover. He also does a great thing at the beginning of his articles. I did read the whole thing, but it has a too long didn't read summary for folks who just don't have the time to get it all. But one of the things I think is the biggest travesty, and maybe this should have been part of our disruptive updates, is why this is so maddening. Like, I think some people can be like, oh, of course the university doesn't want a Palestinian solidarity encampment. They turn into big PR messes. They're taking away space on their campus. Authoritarians don't like that. They think this is fully justified. And maybe even as progressives, we'd be like, oh, we can anticipate this behavior. When we're planning something, we try to keep it secret so they won't thwart our efforts. But it's a right that they have. And these students at U of Calgary, they never got, what the kids at McGill got, or the University of Toronto, was all the benefits of the encampments. Yes, eventually they all ended. As far as I know, there's none still going that are related to Palestinian solidarity in university campuses. I mean, if I'm wrong, please update me. But the amount of community building that was done on these sites, as well as skill sharing and, network building, and the level of deference people heeded to university administration lessened, their willingness to defy orders, and push up against power, that grew. And, they were denied that even for a day, just simply because the university had gotten a request from the Zionist lobby to do anything under their power to prevent an encampment from ever establishing itself. And it's like there's no institution that you can go to. I didn't have time to share this, but maybe we will next week, on like Mount Sinai, the pervasiveness of Zionism within Mount Sinai, and the relationship between Israel and Canada that exists on all these institutional levels that are working to suppress individuals, as well as just like massive ideas. But it's shocking what people are uncovering, and they've been busy, right? It's a testament to how resourceful and resourceful that lobby is, like, to be able to interject on all these different levels, right? With universities, with the media, it's impressive. If we could only move folks to this end for disability rights, for example, you know what I mean? That we could just have this huge lobby that could just send an email to a university and says, like, we'd love you to react this way, right? We'd love you to deny the rights of folks for this particular reason. And they're just like, no problem, right? Like, that pull is something I just can't comprehend. Like, I don't think many of us can, when we struggle so much to be heard and get changes made, and then see that it's sometimes just a fucking email to scare an administration into doing something, or even give them permission. Maybe they always wanted to crush these fucking encampments, and they just had an extra reason to do it. But, kudos for Jeremy for putting that piece up, and, hopefully that fires up the students at U of Calgary to do something. That's up to them, though. But, folks got to respond to shit like that. Like, that's unacceptable coming from a university administration. This isn't a company. This wasn't like Amazon knowing everyone was about to unionize or anything. It was just like students wanting to sit on the lawn.
Are you sure universities aren't companies now?
Oh, touche. Touche. Very good point. Oh, yeah. No, very true. Very true. I think that just proves it, too. Like, image and marketing and, palatability to certain segments of capital and whatnot are most important, and not the well-being of students. But
they had to fund themselves somehow because they've been defunded. So what choice did they have?
Yeah.
I'm not saying it was right. I'm just saying, it's happening for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Let's move to our disruptive updates, right? Although, some of the things that we've already talked about could be seen as disruptive updates, we like to let folks know the different ways people are pushing up, right? Causing a stir, challenging the status quo. I'm going to start with an update from our story from last week and a teaser for the Blueprints of Disruption episode coming out on Tuesday. Sorry, Chris, your episode gets bumped another week. I had complete burnout this week, so there wasn't anything released this week. I am not going to apologize for that because I needed a break. And I even allowed myself, I was like, the anxiety that comes around when I didn't have something for a Tuesday every other week, it would just be like, oh. But I let go of those expectations for 1 week, and we're going to come back with a banger. So Eve Angler joined me in the studio to talk about his arrest, his experience in prison, and what he was thinking about and where he's going now with all of that. Folks are definitely going to want to tune in for this, so I'm not going to release too many details here, but for someone who already knew a lot, I think he learned a lot as well about the punishment of process that we talked about and named an episode after. Just the harms and the stresses that come from being charged with something so completely ridiculous. But one thing I will mention, because, if you don't catch the episode, I do want you to know this, that he absolutely is feeling the way he's feeling right now, which is good, because of the support that he got, because of the thousands of letters because of the court room support, the jail support, the legal support, the videos that people created, including Roger Waters, to demand his release, and organizations that prioritized his case. And he talks about the different ways that played a crucial role, not just for him as an individual, like mentally, but procedurally, how that mattered. And, we talk about that on Blueprints of Disruption a lot, what to do when you're arrested or the experiences people are having with police and Crown. But to have it so firsthand and through the whole kind of process of it, obviously not the final court dates and whatnot or what's going to happen with his charges, but it's very revealing, but also uplifting. So tune in for that. But he has been released and he is not under any real conditions that would prevent him from telling his story, which was the big kind of crux of why he had to stay those 5 days. So yeah, on Tuesday, I don't know, what's the phrase that he used? And I wrote it down. I'm like, that's a good episode title. Zionist Lawfare. So, that perhaps will likely be the title because it really kind of stuck with me. I hadn't heard that term before, but no one needs any explanation as to what the fuck that means. So that's our first update. Eves is free and he's got a bone to pick with some people. Rightfully so. So, yeah, but another victory. A lot of these are related to Palestine. I do have one for tenants near the end. I'll save that one for the end because that is it's a historic one. But we talked about divestment and pension plans just very, very quickly. But one of the things that stops us a lot from doing sometimes boycotts, or at least the argument against some sort of economic measures that we use, is often like, good people have their pensions tied up in this. That is often the argument for real estate investment firms. A lot of teachers' pensions or, public sector employee pensions are tied up in industries we'd rather them not be. And we want them freed up for two reasons, right? One is so that particular company isn't getting funding anymore. So in this case, the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund, after a successful campaign by many, but including World Beyond War Canada, have divested from weapons manufacturers, two of the 5 that were on the list, Northrop Grumman and Textron. So it's not a complete victory, but it is a start. So, those companies will have fewer investors, or at least their investors won't be the Teachers of Ontario. That allows a kind of more guilt-free approach to the BDS movement or other movements that target businesses, because people will lose their pensions, and that's such a heartstring pull, right? Like when you start talking about people's pensions, they're like, oh, well, we should do something about that first, right? Like we shouldn't really go after real estate investment companies because that would actually harm working class people. So fine, divest from those companies then, right? Even if you don't agree with it, know that we're going to make the life of Northrop Grumman difficult. We are going to try to eat away at their shares. So it is a financially prudent decision to divest from genocide, right? We will make it worth your while. So it's another economic tool. But yeah, that pension plan argument has been thrown at me quite a few times on the show when talking about solutions to issues. And it's used as a barrier, and I fucking hate that. So yeah, congratulations. Yeah, there's always a reason why that tactic might not fully work, right? And we could talk about tactics like that, but enough pressure on all these little places, it adds up. So yeah, congratulations to folks at the World Beyond War who announced that victory. You be sure to follow them. They have great campaigns, both disruptive and kind of more broad-based campaigns that you can get involved in. Another tactic, I should have maybe followed this from the university story of University of Calgary, University of Vancouver Island. They had an encampment, and we reported on this when it was removed, a deal was made, and clemency or amnesty was granted to the organizers. They decided, fuck that. They suspended 2 of them anyway. 2 Muslim Palestinians were suspended despite having amnesty. So there is a campaign there. I don't have the link because I rushed through today's notes, but there's a campaign there to at least have the universities stay to their word of giving these students amnesty and to apologize to them. But we've given a lot of examples of ways that university administrations have, betrayed the trust of their students. And I think a lot of people go into university probably pretty naive as to the role of administration, like I did, and I was even a mature student. But then, you face them head on and you realize how ruthless they can be. And I think it can surprise some people. So if folks can sign the petition, Joe's kind of frantically, I think, trying to look for it for me to see if, but yeah, I just thought that was interesting, especially since we were talking about university administrations being pieces of shit at the moment. Did you find it? Oh, you did. Thank you. So
at least the article in regards to the appeal.
Yeah, we'll share it to our story on Instagram later today. I'll link the petition there that they are having, and I think there's some phone numbers for people to call the administration and ask them directly. But the fact that they have to spend energy doing this is just bullshit. Another way people are trying to fight back is through the courts. We've given examples of this before, using lawsuits to, either force an action or to set an example. And in this case, it's to speed up or at least initiate the process of visas for families in Gaza. So 11 families, which include 27 children, babies and children, have launched a lawsuit against the Canadian government there for the visa application delays. So we've talked about that before. Mark Miller, the immigration minister, used to be the housing minister. We got all kinds of reasons to hate that man. He set up a visa. It won't let me. It's a Toronto Star article. And a visa process that's not bringing anybody over. I don't have the numbers right now, but nobody had been let over for months and months and months and months. I don't know if that's still the case, but these 11 families are attesting to inexplicable delays, where they have submitted everything that they've been asked for and they've just not received any response, no explanation, no reasoning, no next hoop to jump through. And so they are going the way of a lawsuit in order to address this. Whether that's successful or, the resources that sucks up for them when they are, it's probably being done by proxy, right? They aren't having to do much of the legal case themselves. But these are families that are in the Gaza Strip right now, fighting for survival and have gone through the process of a visa program designed to save them from that situation. And it was just, that was all window dressing. I don't think they ever meant to bring anybody over. We reported on it at the time, when there's delays, that one of the reasons is because they've actually put Israel in charge of the security clearance for anybody leaving the Gaza Strip. And so in order for you to even come over, that is the only way. Canadian intelligence doesn't have the capacity to do security checks on Palestinians because of the lockdown and the siege and the way that Israel operates. So they've had to. They are relying on U.S. Israeli intelligence to do that for them. And I don't know how expedient that is. Obviously very facetious here, but acknowledging that Gazans need to escape Israel and then giving Israel the last kind of ability to greenlight their escape seems like an obvious problem. But I guess when you are liberals in Canada, or federal liberals, sorry, Kim, we'll say federal liberals in Canada, that's standard operating procedure right now. So keep an eye on that lawsuit, or whether even just the threat of it speeds up the process. But with the Canadian politics the way it is right now, liberals are in power, but are they really and will something like that be successful with a conservative government who would likely just axe the program altogether? So But yep, these are some of the interventions that people are taking to, push back rather than just complain about it. But yeah. So before I get to my last disruptive update, and then we'll do activist tip of the week really briefly after that. It's an easy one. Do either of you have any updates on that you'd like to share of folks stirring shit up? Any local? I know everyone's kind of wrapped up in the election this week.
I don't have any particular. Like I said, the highlight for this week for us and around Ottawa was definitely the Charlie Angus story, at least on the local on the ground.
Yeah, that stuff gets people fired up, and if people get fired up for stuff like that, it's helpful as long as it's pointed the right way.
The only thing I would bring up is that given the results last night of the election, a lot of us are going to be doubling down. This didn't change a thing for us. So stop the 413, Bradford bypass, stop sprawl, et cetera, is going to be working just as hard and harder than we always have. So we are not going to allow the new Ford majority to bulldoze Ontario or sell it.
And I hope a lot of these organizations that have these missions ahead of them still, which seems so exhausting, can at least understand the level of opposition that they can count on. I mean, within the Ontario legislature. I think, when new governments form and a new opposition even perhaps, you kind of task them. You want to bring them on board. You want them to prioritize the issue in the House, right? And so we will lobby them. We will try to get meetings with them. But I think understanding that it's kind of within your own hands at this point, that the level of opposition, like they weren't even able to generate any kind of crisis. Despite the ER closures and almost general strike, at no point did the opposition parties create a crisis that forced Ford's hand. So, that's up to you folks to do, right? And you don't need your local politician, even if you've got an orange one, to come along with you. You could.
Although some do, right? There's definitely politicians that are engaging in their communities and trying to help people, but unfortunately, we're still going to have to work very, very hard.
Yeah, and a victory, getting them to stand up in the legislature and say your case is not really maybe worth the effort that went into educating them and bringing them over to that point, right?
Right.
I would like to see if there are folks that are really kind of on some of these local issues, that they use those databases they just created during the election to mobilize people. If your representative is truly against the local cement factory being built on the lake, then put their resources towards stopping that.
Yes.
They have them. It doesn't mean they have to lie down on the road themselves, but the fact that none of that was done, even though the situations that we're in Ontario kind of tell people where their energies are probably better spent. But yeah, the last disruptive update I have is another tenant victory, and they keep coming. So, Joe, I'm going to add that to the stage. Oh, we're doing the same thing at the same time. So this has happened before on some level where tenants, but not to this degree. So tenants in Hamilton have been battling Michael Klein, their landlord, a notoriously bad landlord, and they're facing rent evictions. So this is where a landlord says, I'm going to spruce up the property in such a way that you need to leave. And the result is a unit that they can no longer afford. And so it ends up being an eviction. And we have many, many episodes on rent evictions and the battle against rent evictions. And this is an historic announcement here where tenants in Hamilton and Toronto who have this same landlord can actually file together at the Landlord-Tenant Board. And this is an escalation of a previous victory that was born through the York Southwestern Tenants Union, where rather than a single tenant from a building having to fight the landlord at the LTB, they were able to argue that all the tenants from that building would be one case, which means like a judge hears a litany of accusations and evidence against bad landlords, right? Not just one person's word against the landlord. It becomes the collective's work against the landlord. And it really starts to balance out that imbalance of power that exists. And so now this is one step further. This is like the collective units in Hamilton can now fight alongside the tenants in Toronto against the same landlord. And so the judge will hear patterns of behavior now that can't be explained through one building situation, but that will directly point to a piece of shit landlord trying to illegally evict people for his own profits. And so this, like other things, sets precedents for other people to do this. So people are already organizing tenant unions like crazy. You would be surprised if you looked around how many buildings around you are already organized, or people are at least involved in your building with another building's organization, right? To just like keep doing that work. But now they're legally allowed to, they're starting to legally almost look like unions without the restrictions. Right? Like, because unions in Canada, when they became legal, had a lot of restrictions. We had to make a lot of capitulations to capital all of a sudden, going, okay, we'll recognize you unions, but you can't do this, that, and the other thing, you know? And so it was like, shit, okay, like, I don't know. We kind of gave up a lot of our teeth. But tenant unions, you can form them, but no one can really control them. And now they're being recognized. Like, they're not being recognized as a union, but as a collective with a grievance against a boss type figure. And so they're getting that legal standing, almost the good part of the legal standing without the limitations, right? Like, these are the rules you have to follow to make it a tenant union, right? These are the thresholds. This is the spending. Like, these are the structure that you need to have in order to be considered a valid tenant union. Like, none of that applies right now. And so they're becoming these forces of nature that landlords are shitting themselves having to deal with, because there's been a few victories in terms of rent evictions being thwarted. So this just adds to that movement, that fuel, gives them more reason to work together too. So Acorn Ontario is who announced this and has been behind a lot of the work here. But they're by far like not the only organization doing that. But definitely check out, if you're not following Acorn already, you're missing out. So there's one for every province. There's even an Acorn Toronto, Hamilton. There's chapters right across the world. Last week, I think we talked about, or the week before, we talked about how they were holding in Europe, conferences for tenants to share how they got their victories, what they were fighting up against, what's coming next for people in other countries and stuff like that. So that kind of networking and resource sharing is also happening. So,
Jessa,
yeah.
question. That immediately sent a quiver of fear through me, reminiscing about the Stop Sprawl campaign and how we successfully, got Halton and Hamilton on side, and then Ford just changed the legislation. What are the chances that he could manipulate the board in some legislative fashion?
Well, like... When I say this is never to say that the landlord-tenant board is a friendly space for tenants at all.
Right. Understood.
So I would say he already does, or like the people running the landlord-tenant boards are not on our side, if that's the best way to put it. So yeah, doing that or explicitly laying out restrictions on the landlord-tenant board is a possibility, but from you would need a more legal perspective to see how much weight precedents hold with landlord tenant board rulings, or whether they can just be legislated away. A lot of the laws around rent evictions are municipal laws as well. And so there's been great work being done there to prevent it at that level. But the problem is municipalities don't spend much on enforcement, right? Cop enforcement.
Don't have much to spend on enforcement.
Well, they do. They're just putting it on police. The
provincial government pulls stuff out of the municipal governments anyway. That is also, tenuous.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. At least part of the platforms of folks.
But I think it's an awesome success. That is really exciting.
Yeah, and it's like it's news to other tenants. So hopefully other tenant unions already know this. It's old news to them because they're on the wire. But knowing that you can make these applications and find the other buildings owned by these landlords, and so it's not just such a uphill battle for them, is very, very promising. But let's go to the activist tip of the week, and then we'll sign off for Friday. It's been 2 hours. That's usually how long we go on Fridays. And even though originally we scheduled the show for an hour, and then we tried to get through an hour, and that's just never happened. So I feel like we've just embraced the 2-hour time slot. I never asked Joe; he just stays. So
I just do it.
Yay! I don't even have notes for this tip because I've had to explain it so many times. But I should have loaded up that video of those two old folks giving advice to what you do, when you're picked up by the police, what you do when you're been kettled, what do you do when you're in a holding room.
I do have that video. Give me a second.
Joe, work some magic for me because it goes along with the activist tip of the week. And that is around bail conditions.
Yeah. It's kind of funny because I was actually looking into it this week. Give me a second here. Just for exactly that. Where did I put it? Because of course. Oh, there it is. All right, so.
Yeah, I think like the question is, what do you do when you're picked up by cops, right? We did a whole spiel on like a lot of the things to do when you're arrested, but this is the number one rule.
We've been fighting fascism for over 50 years.
And so much has changed over those 50 years, such as the ingredients to a successful firebomb.
And the glass that bank windows are made of.
But there's one thing that hasn't changed over 50 years, something that is so important to tell you kids who are new to this movement.
Shut the f up. You're sitting in the police transport van after a protest?
Shut the f up. In a holding cell with your comrades?
Shut the f up. Cop knocks on your door?
Shut the f up.
Texting on an unsecured device?
Shut the f up. Pulled over by the cops after a protest?
Shut the f up. Cop just asking about your day?
Shut the f up. Feds, call your mom?
Tell your mother to shut the f up.
Now, repeat after me. When the cops come calling, what do you do?
Shut the fuck up.
We've been fighting.
Indeed. Indeed. So, and I talked to Eve Engler this morning, right? And he knows this, right? We talked about the video, we've all saw that make the rounds this week, but he was tempted not to talk, to spill, but to argue, when he gets the call from cops that we're going to arrest you for this, that, and the other thing. I want to know, did you think it was a prank? But, his thinking was like, I want to argue this. Like, I want to talk to this cop and be like, that's not this, that, and the other thing. And I've got all these reasons why this is bullshit. And he had to keep remembering, just shut the fuck up. Because he's one to talk, right? Like
It's hard. You're sitting in the back of a cop car and you're just trying to, you've got, how long to kill, right? So you just start talking and you just don't realize what it can offer them.
Yeah, even the act of talking to your comrades in a familiar way, like you're telling them, your comrades, like they might know they picked you up all in the same spot, but that level of familiarity you're giving away in the way that you talk to one another. And so there's a lot of reasons to really just stay silent. But I shared that tidbit because that's not the tip of the week, because like you're gonna like, don't talk to cops for real. I mean ever. We interviewed legal observers who sometimes just hang back at the outskirts of a protest, right? They're clearly marked as such, and they're not agitators at that moment anyway. And they will not even converse with cops who come up and be like, hey, how is your day going? How's it going? Nice. Isn't the weather great out here? Like, don't even acknowledge them. Honestly. It's all just a ruse, and you don't need to. There's no part of you that needs to save face by being, giving them the time of day, so to speak. But the big thing around Eve's case is, while we're talking about the activist tip, is bail conditions. Like the bail conditions that he was facing were unacceptable to him as an individual. And as a movement, they're so harmful, the bail conditions that are facing people. Now, I don't want to give away too much about the interview, but I was surprised. Like, one of the conditions we all know about was the police were trying to say that he could not speak about his case. He couldn't say who had him charged. He couldn't talk about that person at all. And, that is just on top of the other bail conditions that they attempted to put on him. Some that we've seen many people face. So, no attending political rallies or specifically Palestinian rallies, no talking to your fellow accused or even your fellow organizers, no posting about politics on the internet, no, really just gag orders of different forms of muzzling. And it's tough because in order to fight these bail conditions, Eve had to spend 5 days in jail. He's got a 2-year-old that he had been away for some time, and he missed a lot. Like, you'll have to listen to the interview on Tuesday. In those 5 days, it doesn't seem like a lot, and he puts it into perspective, of what Palestinian prisoners are facing. But holding on for 5 days just isn't an option for everybody. Like, Eve didn't have an employer waiting for him to get back to work, that he'd have to explain why he wasn't there for 5 days. And he had a supportive network that helped immensely, but not everybody does. And so what police will do is try to delay through process as much as possible your ability, or delay your release, because they want you to sign on to these ridiculous bail conditions. And some people will sign on to them immediately because they just want to get the fuck out of there. They need to go home. They are afraid. They have circumstances that just don't allow them to hold on. They don't have legal representation. I mean, Eve couldn't even contact his lawyer for days. Only eventually saw him because he got brought to the courtroom. Only got a phone once, and it was days and days in. And after making official requests and having the judge say, you need to get this man access to his lawyer, like, this is ridiculous. But he held on because it was important for him to challenge those bail conditions. And so why is it important for you to challenge bail conditions if you're facing them? One, because it'll be a nightmare on your life, right? Like, you won't know sometimes whether or not you're even in breach of some of these conditions because of how vaguely they're worded. One of the conditions that Eve was actually most upset about first was to not breach the peace. Well, what the fuck's that mean? That can be interpreted so many different ways, right? And you're going to spend every day wondering if you're in breach of the peace. Like, what? I get an argument out in public? No making noise at a protest? For him, not being able to write about what is happening to him felt like a real punishment, like something that just wasn't acceptable to him at all. So they'll put conditions on you that you might eventually breach, not even out of trying. And what happens when you breach your conditions is you don't end up with bail. You end up stuck in prison.
Your next the biggest part, especially if you breach a condition, is that suddenly the rules of bail change, and the biggest one is called reverse onus. This was put in by the federal liberals a couple of years back, and the biggest difference here is that the court no longer needs to trust you when they do that, so they now are asking upon you to prove why you should be released from incarceration, even though you haven't been convicted of any charge. And in Ontario, this also is under a system where justices of peace are going to be making that determination. Justices of the peace have no actual legal training. They're not lawyers. They're not bar certified. They're not judges. They are literally just given a 1 year course, and they now have the power to grant you freedom or not and take away your right.
Yeah, that's crazy. I told Eve that because he actually got to be in front of a judge who took a closer look, right, at what was happening and made the right call. But I was shocked when Joe told me that. And, Joe, you were talking about also some conditions on Ottawa
Yes.
area activists who were arrested for Palestinian solidarity work. And a lot of the times, like, you'll be faced with charges that are total bullshit. Like, Eve is sitting there, he's laughing, he's going like, there's no way you can convict me on this. Any lawyer's telling him the same thing. But that doesn't matter. Those bail conditions don't get resolved until your court date is done. And that could be years. Like, it shouldn't be, right? There's should be mechanisms that prevent these delays, but in reality, there are massive delays in our court systems. So you have to live under these bail conditions or in prison facing court because you breached them for a long, long time. They aren't quickly resolved, even if they're so ridiculous, like a mischief charge that wouldn't even get you jail time. You end up suffering more under your bail conditions than you ever would have of the outcome of your trial, which would probably been like some sort of diversion program, even if you were found guilty, right? The judge wouldn't sentence you to a year without contact with your comrades or other types of restrictions or curfew like that.
Yeah.
So
the example I have here is from last year in November. 4 people were arrested during a daytime protest where they were walking in support for Palestine, and they were on the street the same way that they've been doing for weeks on end. This was on a Tuesday, and the police they knew something was strange because the police were unusually aggressive with the protesters there, and they arrested 4 of them, and they charged them with mischief, obstruct peace officer, and member of an unlawful assembly. And they're putting those charges in because, as they said, they were protesting on the street. So the charges, so the conditions are where the biggest problem that was really, really concerning. So the conditions were they were all given $1,000 bond. They were also told to be at their residence, which is standard. Then there's also no communication with each other. One of the individuals also had additional weapons prohibition because previous time they were arrested, they apparently had a weapon. But here's where it starts getting concerning. They were told no involvement in the Middle East conflict protests, no organizing, and no social media posts about this. And they quoted R versus King as well as El Haj as the reasons behind it as precedents. So yeah, I'll come back to the King part. And then the second one was no wearing mask in public unless medically required. Proof of requirement may be required by a police officer if they're found to be on the street wearing a mask for whatever reason, including medical mask. So yeah, the R King is the part that's concerning because as Jessa was stating before, things that were happening to the convoy that people were cheering, particularly in regards to Pat King having limited conditions and everything else, well, these are now being used against us. Law enforcement, capital system does not care. They view the whole thing as the same thing and anything to suppress. And if they were able to use the convoy to get more precedence in how to suppress protesters, well, that's going to be on all of us now. And we're now seeing the examples of it.
Yeah, so in the same way we don't cheer on those kinds of solutions for our opponents, we have to fight them fiercely when they're applied to us. So the tip is you've got to wait it out. It's worth it, and it was hard for Eve because he didn't know whether he'd be successful, and you don't know either. You don't know if you wait to see a justice of the peace or a judge that they will actually change those conditions. So you could have spent that time in for nothing. But challenging it is part of keeping it above board as well, right? When they know that somebody isn't fully going to just comply, it becomes more difficult. Maybe the police second guess themselves when they start to apply so many bail conditions. It creates a headache for them or whatnot, but it also helps set precedent there in a good way, right? Where a judge says this type of bail condition is not acceptable, right? You can't tell somebody that they cannot face their accuser in any way. There is a pen statement. I'm wondering if I pulled it up. It's worth reading, where, you know, and in the days that Eve was in jail waiting for to be released, or actually just waiting for a bail hearing, getting like real oh, thank you. Can you share that? Because there's a paragraph there that I want to help just like kind of explain the way you can get behind somebody if you don't perhaps agree with everything they have to say. You know, Eve can be a real, well, he's a real agitator and confrontational, and folks may not like his approach. I very much appreciate it. And maybe even politically on some, especially geopolitical items, you may not fully agree with Eve. But what Penn had to say here, I can't read when it's that small.
Oh, sorry. I can try to.
No, that's okay. I'll find it. So they talk about like what is legal and what is not, you know, and they don't take issue, you know, they're not going to opine on whether or not Dahlia Kurtz is actually a fascist or a genocide supporter. She is, but they take the position that it is not a crime to take a pro-Palestinian stance in public. All of these seem like these statements seem innocuous, but this is what, you know, is what is happening. It's not a crime to take a pro-Palestinian stance in public. It's not a crime to object to those who support Israel's actions or to describe them as fascists. It's not a crime to criticize or condemn the state of Israel. It's not a crime to write that Israel's actions in Gaza are genocide. To object in print to others who support Israel's action is not a threat to any individual or to the police. It's not harassment to object to actions taken by the Montreal police or to write about them. It's not a crime to ask other citizens of Canada to object to actions taken by the Montreal. And they say every citizen of Canada, every person in Canada is entitled to write their opinions or to speak out in public. You know, they go on that about a freedom of expression, and that is what the gist of it. But when you say all these things, it's so obvious that what he did was no crime, right? And that the charges facing him, these aren't criminal behavior that even if they were to prove, I mean, he admits to calling her a fascist and a genocide supporter. None of that is criminal. So it doesn't matter, you know, the charges facing you so much. It's actually the bail conditions they seem most interested in. And I think this kind of bucks the trend that people are used to, right? Like I think Chris Thompson was on talking about, you know, his law enforcement family background and how like it's important for cops to know that the charge is going to stick. I don't believe that's the case anymore, right? It's strictly about confining you under bail conditions because they know that will apply for about a year. That's like a year sentence to them.
Well, it's simply suppression, right?
Yeah, they can remove you from the movement.
The movement, exactly. It's got nothing to do with whether or not you actually ever get to jail. They just want to stop you from making noise now.
And especially with, in regards to the people that were arrested there, more than likely their case is not going to be heard by court for at least 2 years.
Yeah.
And then more than likely the Crown's not going to give a crap, and they're not going to bother pursuing because, again, it's nothing. But for 2 years, they can tell these people anything and everything that they want. They hold their rights now in their hands.
Yeah, it's
incredible. Even though they may or may not, again, they're not convicted of anything, but they are completely repressed in regards to being, basically they're repressed from their freedom of expression.
That is terrifying.
We don't need to convict.
Yeah. So, you know, hold out on those bail conditions. Don't sign them. And it's not just for you and your personal circumstances, which you will benefit from that, you know, that challenge, but it's for the whole movement, right? So that you aren't removed from it as an actor that we need terribly, and that it doesn't start to normalize those kinds of bail conditions. Because, you know, even the breach of peace, Eve's lawyer was like, that's normal. Like that's really not one to make a big deal about. And he was like, you don't understand. I can't do that. You know, they will catch me on that for sure. They'll interpret some of the things I do as disruptive enough to do that. And, you know, I brought up the squeak toy example. You know, the way that they're going to interpret your bail conditions is like up to the cop at the flavor of the month. And that's really hard to keep on top or anticipate, regardless of what your counsel tells you. So folks, just hang tough. You know, when you are facing these kind of battles or thinking about, oh, this is a lot, like, is it worth it? And yeah, absolutely it is. Like, absolutely. And part of preparing folks to be disruptive is to normalize the conditions around kind of getting arrested, not to accept it, but to be less fearful of it. So I encourage you to listen to the episode that we drop on Tuesday with Eve, because he does give a very honest account. It's not all pretty of what it was like on the inside and what his experience was like. But I think as a whole, when you listen to it, it was definitely worth it to him to wait those 5 days. He understands that value completely. And it doesn't work, right? If you deny him that tool, then it's not working. They didn't silence Eve. They haven't stopped the movement, even though, you know, they've maybe sent a few activists home from these bail conditions. But, you know, perhaps with better legal counsel or more foresight, they wouldn't have signed those bail conditions. So that's what we aim to do here. You know, if we're going to encourage you to disrupt and to challenge the status quo, I think we have to realistically prepare folks for the fact that you will come up against things like this. And, you know, knowledge is power. And yeah, another thing was just jail support too. But we'll talk about jail support perhaps next week on how to have effective jail support for folks. But yes, thank you so much for joining us on this Friday. It's the last Friday of February. Spring is getting closer every time we meet. Let that kind of boost you, even if it was cold today. And check out the podcast on Tuesday. It's Blueprints of Disruption. It's available everywhere. You can also catch it here on YouTube if that's where you're watching. And we'll be back with Joe on next Friday. Who knows what we'll be unpacking at that point. But until then, keep on disrupting and keep each other safe, please. United,